Boom. Welcome, guys, to today's episode. We're going to be talking about an experience that I had all the way back when I was 12 years old and hiking through the Olympic National Forest, doing 50 miles through a torrential rainstorm, and ultimately just talking about the power of community, being surrounded by the right people that are supporting the same goal and the same vision as you are. They're on their same quest to achieve something that seems impossible. So I'm stoked for today's show. Stoked to connect with you once again, Mike. Let's send it, man.
Yeah, it's been great to be doing these so far, and loving the podcast. Hope you guys that are listening are as well. And actually, the first time I heard about this story from you was when I heard you go on a podcast. Maybe it was like 6 months ago. You were saying, "Oh, I went on this podcast. I listened to it, and then this was a story that came up." And then you were telling me right before we recorded this today that you were like, it was one of the most spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically challenging things you've ever done. How old were you when you did this?
Mike, I was 12 years old. So my parents really inspire the passion for adventure in my life and the lives of my brother and sister. And when I was 12, I was given an invitation to join a group of guys that were 4 to 5 years older than me on this 50-mile backpacking trek through the Olympic National Forest, which is actually a rainforest because it rains, I think, over 150 inches a year. And that number is probably off. I wouldn't be surprised if it's double that. Our 50-mile backpacking trip that we scheduled, the weather forecast was sunny, partly cloudy. It wasn't supposed to rain at all, but little did I know what I was stepping into.
And so when you went and did this trip, I mean, was it a voluntary thing? Was it like, hey guys, we're doing this trip, or was it? I mean, did you, of course, you're at 12 years old, maybe you don't know if you have a choice or not, but like, was this something that were like, hey, I want to do?
Well, we always have choice, right? And I've always been inspired by high performing, adventurous guys, especially people that are performing in the mountains at a level beyond where I'm currently at. And when I was 12 years old, I was so inspired by the older guys in my adventure group that I just wanted to be a part of what they were doing. So I asked my parents, what do I need to do to go on this trip? You had to be 13 years old, but I showed physical proof and a mental commitment to the adventure. So they let me join them on this 6 or 7 day expedition through the Olympic National Forest.
How quickly into the trip did you realize that this was going to be a sufferfest?
So day one was like full excitement factor. Right? I think we hiked 5 miles or so. It was partly cloudy. The temperature was super nice. It was pleasant. Everybody was hiking along, just stoked for the adventure ahead.
Like every good adventure, right? Like you start off on day one, everyone's stoked.
Yeah, like every adventure in life, right? Like starting a business or a new relationship, or in this case, the beginning of what became a suffer fest. Like the stoke factor is so high in the beginning, but after 2.5 days, that stoke started to kind of die out. And that's because it started to rain.
And how much did it rain?
Well, the first day I thought nothing of it. Right? Day 2.5 in, it starts kind of sprinkling. And I grew up in the Pacific Northwest where it rains like absolute madness all times of the year. So I thought nothing of it. But when I woke up the next day on day 3, and it was an absolute downpour, I knew we were in for it because we had to trek 8 miles that day, and it was raining very hard. And it actually continued to rain for the next 3 days. So it rained for 3.5 days straight. And we looked at some of the rain metrics after our trek. Mike, it actually rained 12 inches in that time period. And for any of you skiers or avid snow enthusiasts out there, you probably know that 12 inches of water equals 12 feet of snow. So the amount of moisture was absolutely unruly.
That is absolutely insane.
So,
So, okay, so it starts raining. You're 12 years old. You're on this 50-mile trip and stoked on day one. Gosh, it just sounds like every good Sufferfest. You just get so excited, and then like reality hits. Reality hits on day two. Day three starts pouring rain. What happens to your morale? I mean, what happens to your just energetic state at that point? Do you
my
remember?
oh yeah, reality really hit uh, on the second day that it was raining.
Yeah.
Okay, not the first full day, but the second day, because after 1.5 days of rain, most of our stuff was still dry. Sleeping bag was dry, my tent was dry. I mean, I was getting into a relatively dry but humid environment to sleep in that second night that it was raining. By the second full day of rain, everyone's morale was down. So this is the second full day we have to go trekking. We have to trek another 8 to 10 miles through the forest. We have to wake up in the morning, roll up all of our soggy gear, and everyone was just at an all-time low. I think there was 10 of us and 2 adults, and everyone was just soaked and not stoked. I mean, our internal fires were literally out, and you could just feel it and sense it in everyone's voice and the energy that everyone had. It was
What was
terrible, man.
what was the lowest point of the trip? I mean, what was like the point where you because I feel like typically that happens. You get to a point on a trip, or maybe you're starting a business, or maybe you have a business. There's always a point that you can remember, like, it can't get any worse than this, can it? Was there that moment there where you just, if you could have, you would have taken a helicopter out of there?
Oh yeah, and we'll get to that moment in a second here, but I don't want to skip over this guy. His name was David, and I was reflecting on this adventure this morning. I was trying to remember the chant that he came up with, but he came up with some just ridiculous chant. It was like, muddy water, I don't care, and everybody started chanting this thing that David came up with as we were hiking down the trail on that second full day of rain. And it seems so ridiculous, but singing actually like brings out joy and positive energy and feel good
Totally.
endorphins in your body. And that like collective experience, like sharing it with 10 other guys that were on the same Sufferfest and finding a way to laugh through the challenge
Beautiful.
made it so much easier. Now, that second full day of rain, so we're looking at our third night sleeping in the rain, essentially. Okay. We hiked all the way to an old dilapidated Forest Service cabin in the woods, and it was locked. We were just praying that it was unlocked so we could sleep somewhere that was dry for the night. But of course, it was locked. There was a little covered deck that we could use to get some solace from the downpour that was absolutely raging. And this place that we decided to sleep for the night was on the opposite side of a creek that we had to cross to get to the trail connection on the other side. Now, under normal circumstances, this would just be a simple footbridge that you would walk across a stream that was maybe 12 inches deep.
Sure.
But it had rained 10 inches over these 3 days. Okay. So this creek had morphed into a full-on river. It was about 4 feet deep in its deepest place. The footbridge was completely washed out, and we had to walk across this. I'm remembering a picture of you walking, I think, in Iceland with your ski poles through this deep water.
Yeah.
And it was much like that experience, but
Scary, really scary. Scariest part of the Iceland
really
trip was those river crossings.
incredibly scary. And we'll talk in more detail about that here in a second. But that night before we walked across the river was horrible, man. When I put my tent up for the night, I looked in each of the corners. There was a puddle in each corner. I kid you not, that was probably 6 inches in diameter
Yeah.
and a half an inch deep at least. All of my stuff was soaked. My sleeping bag, my socks, my boots. I had nothing that was dry. The one thing that lifted everyone's spirits that night was this guy. His name was Kenny. I think he was 16 or 17 years old at the time. And Kenny somehow was able to get a raging fire going.
Oh
I'm
my
not talking like,
God.
I'm not talking about like one of those little struggling wet fires that your average outdoorsman tries to get going in a soggy rainstorm, but
Yeah,
somehow
that's
he
me.
got a full on bonfire going.
Wait.
And
Oh, hold on.
yeah,
Contextually for the listener, because I'm sitting here being like, wait, hold on a second. You're in one of the wettest places in North America. You're on day 3, 4 of this thing. You're
I
you're
think
in
we're like day 4. Yeah.
okay. You're in a rainforest. It's pouring rain, and somehow this guy gets a raging fire going.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know how he did it. I really had no idea at the time. But now reflecting back on it, building a lot of experience in the outdoors and making fires in my little mountain cabin almost every day in our wood stove, I think what he managed to do was find some wood that was dry enough for him to get the fire going, that was tucked under old fallen down trees. And that fire and the community that surrounded that fire that evening was so necessary for all of our spirits to just get lifted and not feel like we were going to be stuck in this state of utter soaking hell forever.
Yeah.
And again, to just laugh for a little while. I mean, we all managed to kind of dry our socks, maybe to the point where you just ran a load of clothes through the dryer and you feel like your clothes were halfway dry.
Yeah.
So, but that night really was focused on supporting each other and laughing a little bit, and then crawling into our soaking sleeping bags for 8 hours of, I'm not even going to call it sleep, just basically laying in a soaking rag. So
I always find it amazing that on an adventure and when it comes to our work, it's no different. That actually, we're going to tie this into community, but how if you just continue with the process, it eventually clicks, right? Something eventually clicks. Fine was saying it last night. Finds a guy in our program. He recently just quit his job, got his digital marketing agency off the ground, landed his first client. Right now more clients are coming in the door. At the end of the group call last night, he says to the other guys in the program, he goes, hey, I just wanted to say before we end this group call that just don't give up. Even if you're not entirely sure what you're working towards, don't give up, because eventually you're going to get what you want. And I think that, I messaged him after and I said, it's unbelievable to hear you say that, to go from in a position a few months ago where you're in a job that you hate to now you've quit, landed he stepped into the unknown. And I think about you guys, you're stepping into the unknown in this rainforest, and somehow, some way, you're able to get dry, get warm. I mean, this guy creates a fire in the middle of a rainforest. I love those types of stories because you could never predict that.
you never could. And we talk about the thing that we as humans fall such prey to, the hope and pray principle or tactic. Oh, I hope for this, so I pray this happens. And man, we were just hoping that the next day we would wake up and the sun would be blasting and it wouldn't be raining, and we'd walk across this river and be so stoked, even though we were still soaked. But walking down the trail in our shorts, we woke up the next day and it was raining harder than it had been on any of the prior days. It was a joke.
Yeah.
And the the adults brought us all together into a group because this is a serious situation. I mean, we have to walk across a raging river that was, it had to have been 50 to 100 feet wide. I don't remember exactly how wide it was, but
Sure.
the current was powerful. And we decided to cross the stream because the other option was to turn around and walk back the direction that we came, which was like 35 miles or something. And I remember us all getting across the river safely, except for one unfortunate gentleman. And we were all tied to like a safety rope. So as each person went across the river, we were essentially on belay, like
Hmm.
rock climbing on belay. We're on belay through this river.
Sure.
One guy fell in the river, and
Oh God.
I had this weird intuition that somebody was going to slip. It was just the perfect recipe for somebody to fall in. And I mean, we talk about regression to the mean in sales and marketing, but if you have enough people doing something dangerous, someone is going to make a mistake, someone is going to slip. And when you slip by yourself, especially in the outdoors, let alone in business or anywhere that we make mistakes in life, it can be catastrophic. But when you're surrounded by people that are supporting you and lifting you up and watching your back in the case that you do slip, that slip isn't so bad. So this guy, yeah, he slipped in the stream. He got absolutely soaked, like he had gotten into the bathtub with his backpacking gear on. When he got to the other side of the river, he was hypothermic, shaking and shivering, and it was downpouring. And the situation that was serious got really serious at this point. I mean, this guy was now in a state of probably level 2 hypothermia, the uncontrollable shivers, if you know what I mean, Mike, like where you're,
How many levels are there to hypothermia?
so there's three. The first one is kind of, it's where your body's just shaking. I
Yeah.
mean, the average skier probably experiences that every day on a cold day of skiing.
Yeah.
Level 2 is when your body temperature actually starts to go down a little
Mm.
bit, and you go into uncontrollable shivers. So your body actually shivers to try to warm itself back up. That's why we start shaking. And when that becomes uncontrollable, things are starting to get really serious. Level 3 is when your body actually shuts down. You stop shivering, your organs start shutting down, parts of your body start to shut down because it doesn't have the energy to keep itself functioning. So things get really serious at level 3. People get really quiet, things get weird, and they essentially need to go to the hospital. But we're out here in the wilderness. It's downpouring. Everyone's on the other side of this river. One of our teammates is soaked and shaking. And we helped him put some dry clothes on, or the driest clothes that we had in the group, and wrapped him in an emergency blanket and heated up some warm tea for him and helped him just kind of regain his state of consciousness. Not that he lost consciousness, but like a state of consciousness where you can actually function and begin to think about the fact that there's 6 more miles to walk today. So
So I think about your story, and I think that there's an element that has really brought a lot of this trip together, from uh, trekking together, the fire, essentially saving this guy who falls in the river. I mean, if he's by himself, real dangerous. Like what's the element that's starting to tie this whole story together for you?
sure. I mean, the underlying thing in this story that keeps it so powerful for me in my mind, even 22 years later, is the power of community, and having a community that's supporting these seemingly impossible goals. I mean, at 12 years old, Mike, I had never hiked more than I think 20 miles on a backpacking trip. So I'm talking about going 2.5 times that,
Mhm.
but with a group of people that are on the same mission as me, and a group of people that I trust, people that have my back, people that are going to support me if I was the one to fall into the river, and ultimately people that I could celebrate the wins with along the way. I mean, we're talking about a 7-day trip and community dynamics and environmental dynamics and all
Yeah.
of these unknown factors and variables. So I think the underlying thing here really is a principle that I'm forgetting his name right now, but he was the first American to climb all 7 summits without supplemental oxygen. His name was
Ed
Ed
Viesturs.
Viesturs.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. He wrote a book called Failure. There are no shortcuts to the top, is his book. And he talks about the power of having the right team, the right attitude, and the right tools. And when you have those three things, impossible becomes possible for you.
So if someone's listening to this episode today and they love your story, right? Because we have so many guys in the program. They're skiers, they're adventurers, they're sailors. You know, they're just lovers of life, and they're resonating with this, and they're looking for, you know, people who have got their back. Now they're in this professional space where they have this entrepreneurial dream that they're trying to turn into reality, or maybe they are an entrepreneur, and they're just feeling stuck with their biz. They're trying to have it really be their full-time income and thrive. Or maybe it's Scott, maybe it's even a guy who's just feeling unfulfilled in his current job right now. He knows that it's possible to do work every day that he loves and get paid for it, but these guys just aren't fully living that dream yet. What would you say to them today?
Surround yourself with people that are performing or seeing a vision that's 2.5 times what you're thinking right now, or you've experienced, or you believe is possible. Like I shared in this short story today, when I was 12 years old, the farthest that I had gone backpacking was probably 20 miles before I went on this 50-mile trek. But I found a group of other guys that could see it as possible to go do this 50-mile trek. People that had set these much loftier mountaineering goals, and at the time, scholastic goals. And surrounding myself in that environment of high-performing, adventurous men made it almost impossible for me to fail, even though I was 4 years, 5 years, in some cases, 6 years younger than these guys. So if I was to give you one recommendation, find your community that supports the vision that you have and elevates that vision to a height beyond what you can even possibly imagine, because the power of the community will absolutely amaze you.
Yeah. So if you're an adventurous man who's listening to this today and you resonate with, what Scott's saying, what we're saying on this podcast, and you really are looking for that community and that mentorship of just guys who are getting after it, and they're trying to make their dreams become a reality and get paid to do what they love so they can thrive, right? They can live their ideal lifestyle. Book a call with us. I'll put it down in the show notes. We've got a proven methodology, expert mentorship, supportive community. So Scott and I would love to connect with you and help you clarify what you're working towards and give you some next steps. So that link will be down there. Book a call. Happy days. It was a beautiful podcast today, Scott.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in, guys. So stoked that I got to share a little sliver of my adventurous lifestyle. And I'll look forward to connecting with you on a call in the future.
All right. Cheers, guys.